It's elderflower time of year and we've been out picking some. You can do all sorts of things with elderflower and they smell really nice as well. So you can, of course, make elderflower cordial, something we do lots of. You could have an elderflower fritter, deep fry it, and then have a little snack on some elderflower like that. It does work, believe me. And also, on top of that, there is elderflower champagne, always popular. It is what it's commonly known as. It's not technically champagne, of course, because it doesn't come from the right region of France for that. You could call it elderflower fizz if you want. It is alcoholic, so don't give any to the children, other than maybe a sip. But we're going to try and make some today. It's quite a long process because it's alcohol. It's got to have some brewing going on. The actual preparation doesn't take that long, but you've got to wait a while for that brewing process to take place. So let's start. You're going to need for this the usual sort of things you'd have in the kitchen: the scales, a nice bowl, because you're going to have to sort of measure out some sugar. You need some elderflower. For this, we're going to make about 8 litres of this alcoholic elderflower drink. So if you have the larger heads like this, or even larger sometimes, then you're going to need about sort of 16 of these, so 2 for every litre approximately. So not that much. But if you've got quite a lot of smaller heads that you picked, because a lot of plants have the little small ones as well, you need quite a bit more, at least double it. So that's what I've done here, because we've got a bit of a mixture going on. You're going to need some lemons as well. That's going to help preserve it. We've got some relatively fresh ones, and also one I've frozen, because there's a little technique you can do with this to actually help zest it. Now, sometimes you'll see in recipes that some people do that they use less lemons and a little bit of cider vinegar or white wine vinegar. We have got both, but not very much of the white wine vinegar, so we might just use a tablespoon of cider vinegar. But basically, you need, for this amount, 3 reasonably large lemons. So let's get going. We need to measure out and start cooking. You could boil your water, with a pan on the cooker, or you just pour it in the kettle. It's much quicker. We're going to need around 800 grams to 1 kilogram of sugar. I think we'll go for the 1 kilogram in this particular case. We, as you can tell, do quite a bit of this kind of cooking, so we have the giant bags. These are 25 kilograms, and probably the cheapest way of buying your sugar. But obviously you normally get it in a smaller size than that, but I'll measure it out now. As well as sweetening your drink, it's obviously what the alcohol is going to feed itself on, or the yeast as it starts fermenting. Now luckily, elderflower generally has its own yeast on it. Now, they are very delicate flowers. Have a look over them, make sure they haven't got any insects on or anything you don't want on there. Get rid of the really thick stems and then use them like that. Yep, we're there. And the kettle's almost boiled as well. One thing you do need to go and find yourself is a container that will hold 8 litres at least. And yeah, as you can tell from our sugar, we do make a lot of this kind of thing. So we have a great big bucket. This is one of these sort of brewing buckets. You can get them from some of the sort of brewing shops, and there's 1 or 2 sort of hardware stores that sell them as well. Make sure it's nice and clean inside, give it a good clean round. I like to put a little bit of vinegar in and wipe it round or spray it round as well, just to make sure it's nice and clean and sterile. If you haven't got a nice posh lid like this one, say posh, it's made of plastic, but you can use a bit of muslin cloth in the end to cover this, just to stop anything you don't want getting in there. Right, so put that to one side just for the moment. Wait for our water to boil, that's about right. I'll bring it back again so you can see the first of these going in. As I say, you do actually want this to cool itself down, so it's not essential that it's boiling, because you don't want it scalding those elderflowers when it goes in, so it's going to get cooler. Now you've got your sugar and the water is hot, you want this to dissolve into that hot water, so you can just pour that in. I'll dig myself out a wooden spoon, we'll give it a quick stir as well. Just helping it dissolve. While we're waiting on that kettle to do its next litre of water, we might as well put that tablespoon of cider vinegar in. Last one boiled. Right, so there goes our third and final of the hot litres of water. You might be able to guess what happens next, as we're going to make 8 litres in all. We need 5 litres of cold water. We're there. I didn't lose count. We have 8 litres of water with the sugar in it, and also with the bit of cider vinegar as well. Don't need that for the moment. We need to zest our lemons now. We're going to use a lemon juice as well. We had a bit of disaster earlier. We were looking for our lemon juicer, but seemed to have lost it mysteriously, so we're going to have to do it the old-fashioned way with a fork in a minute, and a knife obviously to cut the lemons. But first of all, we need to get the zest off. You can do it in strips, so the easiest way of doing that is with just an ordinary sort of potato peeler, and you can get it off like that. I'll just put it in here for the moment. There's no need to finely grate it. You can grate it, and you can do that. Ah, it's a nice smell. You can do that though on the sort of larger grater size rather than the very small one for this kind of recipe. When you make this, there's definitely some nice smells. You've got that lemon, and you've got that lovely smell of the elderflower as well, which you're missing out on. You may remember earlier I talked about the frozen lemon. This is quite good if you do want to use a grater, because it tends to grate more easily like this. And lemons freeze quite well as well. You can keep them for quite a long time. There's a whole lemon just frozen in your freezer. Chuck it in, as I mentioned earlier. Nice technical term. Let's go juicing. If you haven't got your lemon peeler like us, because we've lost it somewhere, you'll have to do it the hard way. Alright, we've done all our lemons now. We've got some lemon juice out. I'm going to pour that in. Let's deal with our elderflower at the same time. And the temperature of this water should now be just about right to get the brewing process going. So in a couple of days we'll be filtering and bottling this, hopefully, once we see that fermentation taking place. Now you actually want to put this somewhere like in your kitchen, funnily enough, if you've got a spare bit of space that is not too cold. So you don't want to store it away in a garage or anything at the moment, because you want that fermentation to take place. And slightly airy as well, just to make sure there's a good air circulation. So make sure your lid's not on too tightly, and I can see a space just over there in the corner. So we've let a good few days go past now. Minimum time for this is a couple of days. In the end, we allowed it to have 4 or 5 days because we thought it wasn't brewing quite well enough. So, but it's getting there now. So the next thing we've got to do is get rid of the actual elderflowers in there. So just going to filter it basically, and then it's time to put it in its bottles so that we can enjoy it in a week or so's time. This is always fun when you've got 10 litres of liquid, 1 colander, and I've got another big container, as you can see here, one of our biggest saucepans. Gonna try and pour it through here and catch all the elderflower at the same time. I think the easiest way you'll find to do this is if you have a second person, unless you want to pour it into lots of small containers. So person behind the camera, over here, My able assistant Jill. Obviously, normally it'd probably be best if you're wearing an apron, so when this big load of elderflower comes out at the end, which it might do, it doesn't splash her too much.
Back.
Obviously, having made sure you've washed your hands first, give it a good old squeeze to get the last bits of liquid out. Just to make sure this nice bit of muslin cloth is sterilised, we're going to pour some boiling water from the kettle over it. There are various bottles you can use for doing this particular job. Plastic bottles are actually quite good for elderflower champagne because as it gets fizzier and expands, that bottle's going to get more taut, and if you had a glass bottle it might explode, so you don't really want that. So when you do store them somewhere where you're not too bothered. They do explode, sometimes even on the plastic ones. The caps sometimes come off. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But you want to make sure your caps are sterile. We do have a glass bottle here. If you are going to use a glass bottle, you want one of these sort of thick glass ones with a stopper like this, and this can take quite a bit of pressure, and also you can, what is known as burp it. How lovely that is. So when it gets too fizzy after a couple of days, you can then release some of that gas. So again, we're just pouring water all over those, make sure they're nicely covered. Now we're going to boil up some more water so we can sterilise the bottles. So let's get ourselves a bit prepared, ready for the bottle sterilisation and for pouring the liquid into the bottles eventually. Because they're going to be quite hot bottles, especially with glass bottles, I always lay a sort of tea towel on something that's heat proof, so there's less likelihood that the bottle will crack, because if it's too much for a shock it could do that. These bottles are reasonably warm, so it shouldn't happen, and they're also nice thick glass. So basically by putting it on here we're protecting it from cracking. It's nice thick glass anyway, so hopefully it shouldn't happen, and it's also a reasonable temperature. This particular bottle already is not like it's really cold, so that should stop it from cracking when we pour some boiling water in it to sterilise it. And the same with the plastic one, it's not going to crack in the same way, but you just need to be a bit careful with it. And plastic also, as you can see, tends to sometimes go quite soft when it's got really hot water going into it, so you need to be a little careful with that. You can see the shock that's happening to it already by doing that. So we'll just let that adjust itself. We'll pour some water into the glass one. So you don't necessarily need to fill these bottles completely up to the top. You could do it that way. The other way is to put a cap on when you get a little bit up the distance. When it's still really hot, give it a good shake around. With plastic bottles you can obviously do this, which I think is the best way because it's the easiest when you've only got a few bottles, or you can get those sort of sterilising tablets that you can use in them instead. Now our muslin cloth that we sterilised earlier should be just about ready for us to pour the liquid through once again. So let's get rid of the old water from that. This is just going to catch the last of those sort of elderflower petals that didn't get caught when we first did the pouring through. Got a smaller bowl this time because we need that to control it when we're pouring into the bottles. Nice and gently is the answer to this one. This is a good test of a steady hand. Now we're going to seal it up. Make sure that's nice and firmly in place. Just click that down, and that's that done. We're going to leave it for a couple of days before we check on it again. In fact, you can almost see some fizz going up already. And do our plastic bottle now. It has gone into an interesting shape, this particular one, so it may not be the best bottle, but we've got some more to try later. I suspect that will gradually, as it ferments, go back into its normal shape, don't you? So after a couple of days of leaving this, and the best thing is to leave it in an atmosphere like a kitchen, tuck it away in the corner like we did with the Elderflower Champagne when it was first brewing, leave it a couple of days. If you see these bottles go nice and taut, you know it's definitely building up the gas. Keep a bit of an eye on it, and then just very gently release the cap and it will let that extra gas out, and then leave it probably for another couple of days. Check on it one more time. You want to store it somewhere cool and dark. We've got a basement, that's ideal for it. The other way to do it is just stick it in the fridge if you've got enough room, and that will stop the fermentation getting any further, and it will be nice and cold, ready to drink then. Yep, yep, I think that's worked. Wasted a bit, I'll be a bit more careful with the next one. Cheers. Cheers.